Hello, and welcome to The Source Within with Chloe Petalino, where I share the source within me with hopes it sparks the source within thee. Hello, and welcome to The Source Within with Chloe Petalino, where I share the source within me with hopes it sparks the source within thee. And I am so excited to be back here today recording and speaking to you all. I know it's been a little while. Thank you for your patience as I adjust to my new life on the road, living a van life. This is an episode I have wanted to record for quite some time now about Jesus. And the reasons I have been wanting to record on this, and it's not just me, Jesus himself, has also connected with me and really requested that I contribute to the correcting of information about his life and about his teachings that have been kind of misconstrued for the past 2,000 years. And he was such a fundamental person and existence for us in current times that I really think, and he definitely agrees, that it's time for correction, basically, of the misinformation and mistruths that have been told about him for several thousand years here. So I am going to talk about basically where we even get the information about him, what his teachings actually were, and more about his life. What did he do? What did he study? Where did he go? And also, how do you and how can you connect with him yourself? Because he is an incredible teacher. He is an ascended master. What is an ascended master? Ascended master is somebody who has risen to basically an existence mostly in spirit form, although they are very advanced spiritually. They're able to embody and come back down if they so choose. And in fact, side note, found this one out recently, channeling with my friend Tracy Kumbera. Check her out for her own channelings for one-on-one sessions with her. But in speaking with Jesus, he reincarnated actually after his existence as Jesus the Christ during the MLK times, Martin Luther King, and he came and embodied as a person. He was not famous or anything in that incarnation, but in order to basically help with pushing the planet towards a certain way, right, for the rights of all people. And so he was actually part of that during that time. So that's just a very cool side note that I recently learned and wanted to share with you all. But without further ado, let's get into it. So, where are we getting the information from about Jesus? Okay. From the church perspective, in the New Testament, that is where the general public, basically the majority of information about him, has come from. But let's get into that a little bit more because, what's so fascinating or, surprising or what have you, I found is that, Christianity makes so many claims about Jesus as the savior and all of these things. In the Bible, let's get clear on this. In the New Testament, the entire time, what they're writing about in his life is based on years of his life from ages 0 to 12. Okay. 0 to 12, and then ages 30 to 33. That's it. Okay. So we'll get into that because there is content that we'll cover and we get from other sources, but that's all it's based on 0 to 12 and then 30 to 33. The whole 18 years in the middle of his life are completely missing. Also to note that the New Testament, and I know many of you probably already know this, but I'm just going to refresher here. It was written 70 years after Jesus's death. Okay. It was all written in hindsight. And it was written at the Council of Trent in Council of Nicaea, basically where these male priests decided what would be included or not included in the Bible. And I think most of us know at this point in time, they very hand selected certain things, removed any women from the Bible, supporting their mission to support a patriarchy system. with men being in power and control. So again, New Testament was missing a ton of his life, and it was written 70 years after his existence. So, I don't think today's time we would say that's very factual or very, reliable information, right? If somebody told you, well, oh, I'm doing it in hindsight of like 70 years ago, right? We wouldn't really think that's reliable information. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Now, I will say that one thing is mentioned in the Bible about those 18 years um, that was missing about his life. And it was said that he increased in wisdom during this time. Now, a little esoteric information here. Wisdom is referred to as the feminine component in Kabbalah, which is the original form of Judaism, very, very ancient. So it's interesting that the one thing that was referred to was that he had increased in wisdom. And again, wisdom is a feminine aspect, feminine component. And he certainly did increase in wisdom during those 18 years because he was traveling all over the world, going to mystery schools. But I'll get more into that later. So the New Testament, questionable, right? How they're getting their information. Now, the Essene, also known as the Gnostics, did write text, and they existed around the time of Jesus, so we would think more reliable. However, they were responsible for writing the Dead Sea Scrolls. However, Jesus is not directly mentioned in the Dead Sea Scrolls. On the other hand, the Nag Hammadi texts that were found in Egypt in 1945 do refer to Jesus. So they're actually in Eastern societies, there are ancient texts from the Eastern world that do refer to Jesus. And so one of these texts is called the Yoga of Jesus, and that was by Paramahansa Yogananda, a very respected legal leader and spiritual teacher from the East. And they refer to the Gnostic texts that speak about Jesus. There were also ancient manuscripts that were copied at the Hamas Monastery in Tibet by a Russian traveler, Nicholas Notovich. He published The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ. And there's also this text by Levy. It's called The Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ. And he really talks about, essentially, he goes into the Akashic record, and the Akashic record is this universal knowledge mind center where it is the recorded of all history throughout all time and space. And he was able to kind of to tap into that record system and access basically Jesus's story that was missing from the New Testament. So that's very cool. Anyways, that was done by Levi. So this is where I'm getting some of the information, but I just wanted to give you a background of like, okay, where do we actually get the information about Jesus? Because again, the retrospect of 70 years prior isn't the most reliable, right? Okay, now let's talk about the history of Jesus and his life. Okay, so Jesus's parents, Mary and Joseph, they were Essenes. Now, there is some overlap between the Essenes and the Gnostics. It's unclear if Jesus himself identified as an Essene necessarily, but I think he did agree with some of the teachings. He more so, my understanding is, identified as a Gnostic. And the Gnostics, what that actually translates to is insight. And the Gnostics believed in this intuitive process of knowing oneself, of going within, of trusting our own higher selves, that we, all have this God spark within, right? Like the source within. That's what the Gnostics believed in, or the Gnostic teachings held, which were believed in by the Essenes. So he was really birthed into a family that already had this type of belief system, the belief system that we all are connected by this unifying factor, which is that we're all made of the same God spark. We all have God within us. And therefore, we have a lot of abilities if we tap into basically our God sparks within. So he was born into that family. Now, Mother Mary in her own right went to study and did study in mystery schools and learned lots of the ancient wisdom and knowledge. So, she was being prepped this whole time up until his birth that she was going to be the mother to this very important bearer of the light, which is what he was referred to. I'll get into more of that a little bit later. So, she was being prepped from a spiritual teaching way prior to the coming of Jesus. And then Joseph, it's interesting. He was a carpenter. And for me, what stands out about being a carpenter is that there is relation to a lot of symbolism in masonry. So, who knows? And masonry is also really connected to the Templars and this sort of thing. So, and they were connected to the Rosicrucians. And so, I wonder, I don't know much about Joseph's background, but there could be some kind of connection there as well in terms of some background or education or what have you, in terms of other spiritual practices of that time that were not as common to, the patriarchy and the subsequent church that was developed. So anyways, that was a bit of his background and what he was born into. And we know this story of the Magi, and I'm releasing this just around Christmas time, which we don't know if this was actually Jesus's birthday, but it was selected, so here we are. And that's why it's celebrated at this time. But the Magi were there, in more traditional stories known as the three wise men, basically looked up to the stars, and they followed the stars to find and go see the birth of this coming of basically this bearer of light. That's what he was referred to as. Jesus was referred to as this, that he was going to be bringing the light. Okay. When Jesus was born, people were living in not great times. There was a lot of oppression. It was ramping up, as we know through his, the story and the persecution and this sort of thing. But at the time when he was born into, that was already kind of going on. The patriarchy was already with Judaism at that time, not Kabbalism, which is the original form of Judaism and really ancient, more esoteric teachings, but it had already progressed into that time to being more of a patriarchal flavor, basically, at that time. So, anywho, the Magi came from the east by following these stars. And now I am going to pause here and side note. So, I teach about the cards of the Magi. And so check out my website, chloepetalino.com, to look more into that. I have this course that teaches you all about the cards of the Magi. But guess what? The standard deck of playing cards is actually an ancient calendar system that, yes, was followed by the mystery school of the Magi. And yes, this is the same Magi that came from the East. Well, I don't know if those exact three people, but those three individuals were part of the Order of the Magi, right? And so this incredible calendar system that we now, use as playing cards, came from them. And so check out my website to get more. I also do readings. It's really incredible, very predictive. It'll blow your mind, the information you can get from it. So just wanted to make that as a side note because it's so cool when I learned that, the cards of the Magi are actually the Magi who came to see Jesus. I was like, wow, everything is connected. So that's pretty cool. Now, I also read recently, it was a post on Facebook, that the three wise persons were actually a symbol of the three divine feminine aspects: Mother Mary, Mary Magdalene, and I'm not sure the third Mary. Now, Jesus and Mary Magdalene reportedly had a daughter named Sarah. So that, could be the third. So I don't know, but I'm just throwing that out there. For those of you listening on YouTube, I'm really curious. Have you heard this before? And if so, who is the third of the three potential divine feminine that the three quote unquote wise persons were representative of. I would love to hear more about that. But anyways, needless to say, right, Mother Mary was prepping for this. She was, very designated as this, carrier of going to be this beacon of light that was coming into society during a very dark period of time where they really needed a beacon of light. So that is how Jesus really came into this world. So in terms of Jesus's younger life and ongoing life, it's likely that Mary and Joseph were of some means. Their family was of some means, because it was typical of that time, kind of how it is now, even for people who were born into family of means to travel abroad and to study elsewhere. And this was the same for Jesus. And so now, again, this ages 12 through 30 that are totally missing, those 18 years. Well, guess what he was doing during that time? What he was doing during that time was studying in all of these mystery schools all over the world. Now, isn't that interesting that at the Council of Nicaea, whoever decided just happened to exclude all of these 18 years when Jesus was studying all of this ancient, esoteric, profound knowledge that teaches people the power within themselves, okay? They did not include that. What I suspect is because they wanted to take the power away from the people, from an individual person, and have people place basically all of their autonomy, their self-power, all these kinds of things. They put that then basically in the church that was constructed in order to disempower the mass population. So I really want to make that clear, because that's part of Jesus's teaching. He was doing the opposite, right? He came, and I'll get into his teachings later, I'm getting ahead of myself, but he came to teach us that we all have the power within. And what happened is his teachings were totally, wiped away and turned into something that was literally the antithesis of his teachings. But I get ahead of myself here. So he likely traveled the trade route when he was studying, following like the Mediterranean, and eventually ended up in China and India. The countries were different at that time, obviously. So I'm giving it in modern terms, but yeah, he really did have this incredible, extensive spiritual education and multidisciplinary initiation. But he started actually studying with the Jewish priests. So he started kind of how one would traditionally. He studied with a Jewish sage, a rabbi, and actually lived in Alexandria, Egypt, to study. And he had studied with him for quite some time. However, he ended up disconnecting from him, and also maybe he was kicked out because he did not agree with, basically, this rabbi was promoting the patriarchy belief system. And Jesus believed and understood the importance of the feminine, that both masculine and feminine were necessary, and that one was not to be a power over, that both were needed. Again, I'll get more into that later, but so he ended up disconnecting from this really famous rabbi, or getting kicked out, or a combination of both, because he didn't agree with his teachings. So around 14 years old, I think it was 14, per the Yoga of Jesus by Yogananda, he went to India and studied. And he also studied in Tibet and Western India. He studied Buddhism. He studied with Brahmins, the tantrics of Odisha. He studied the esoteric science of the God union, the union with God within, through meditation, learned Kriya Yoga, about the Kundalini. It was really in-depth studying of yoga in all of its facets, not just the poses. Check out my other podcast I recorded about yoga and what it actually is about. So he studied, that in India. He went to Greece. He was in Persia at around 24 years old, at Persepolis, in the city, and he learned about, quote unquote magic at that time. Hor, Loon, and the Mare, what is also referred to as the three wise men, which I think is Horus, Luna, the moon, and Mercury. So he was learning about astrology, right? And he also spent some time in Assyria, and he was in Greece. And then, of course, in Egypt, he studied at the temple of Isis, Osiris. He studied the mystery school or the lineage of Solomon, and, Greek and Vedic tantric philosophy. So he studied all sorts of esoteric and mystery school knowledge, again, that was never shared about in the traditional, or in the Bible, was left out by the Council of Nicaea. So he and Kabbalah, of course, was part of this, and the Kabbalistic wisdom teachings of the embodied Shekinah, which is a divine feminine. So he also learned a lot about that. And it was upon his returning from all of these studies abroad where his mind really was vastly opened. Like, he was, I think to some extent he knew at a very young age, right? Of course, Mother Mary knew. She was given this information. He knew at a young age that he was meant to be an important figure in history. Right? He knew that to some extent, but it wasn't like he came in fully awakened. He also, certainly partially awakened, because he did know that he had this big mission and big purpose at a very young age. But then he too, just like all of us, studied and learned from the wise and sage people of that time. And so, yeah, he had learning to do. Now, when he returned back after all of his travels, that's when he was like, what is going on? Like, I don't agree with the status quo, the patriarchy, um, the Romans that were coming in, and, this power over and exploitation. And so he didn't agree with that. And very importantly, he respected women. And that was a big, counterpoint for the, traditional culture at that time. And so that was when he really started doing a lot of his preaching and stuff, is upon his return, and sharing basically the learnings and the teachings that he gained throughout his life, and also through meditation and connecting with his own higher self, and then being able, developing all of his, abilities, right? Telepathy, astral projection, all these things we're kind of learning about now more. He was able to study and hone those skills then, and come into more and more of his incredible gifts, abilities, etc. So, now he also, through his relationship with Mary Magdalene, that's why he didn't care. When he met Mary Magdalene, it was at the well, and women were not at that time supposed to be at the well by themselves. And people would misconstrue that as women being prostitutes or whatever. And Jesus didn't care, because he thought it was BS. He's like, no, I have respect for women just as much, as respect for man, understanding that both are necessary and the components of that, and also understanding that Kundalini, which is the connection of both energies intertwined to create a bigger whole than oneself. This alchemical connection. These were the Rose teachings, the Rosicrucians, which subsequently became the lineage of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. Rosicrucians really are the real carriers of Jesus's actual teachings, is through Rosicrucianism. So look into that if you're interested in learning more of his true teachings. But he knew. And what ended up being is that he needed Mary Magdalene and their alchemical connection together in order to reach a state, energetic state of being able to transcend essentially and to develop his higher spiritual abilities, right? Um so anyways, I just am reinforcing this because again, he disagreed with the teachings of the time that that men were in a position of higher power and that women were second class citizens. He just never ever believed that. And again, hence one of the reasons why he's like, you need to record about this stuff, because I'm not the only one. Many other people are spreading the real truths of his teachings, but this is a big one, especially for where we are in history right at this time. Now, we know that Jesus, I think everybody kind of agrees that Jesus was meant to come to earth for a specific reason. And Yogananda's texts say, for example, and so the holy ones have judged. When man have needed added light, a master soul has come to earth to give that light. And now the day star from on high begins to shine, and Jesus is the flesh-made messenger to show that light to men. Yes, so he was coming in to carry that light. Now, Jesus was super ahead of his time. As I said, at that time, it was just the beginning of the patriarchy. I mean, just the beginning of this past 2,000 years. And so, in some ways, his teachings were, just right on time, but also ahead of time. And from my understanding, even, with channel and connection with Jesus, is that which is an interesting concept because we think, okay, he knows everything kind of, right? There's like some, he is close with God. And we all are to some extent. So it's a weird thing to say, but it's almost like he didn't even realize how much his teachings were going to be misconstrued and either rewritten or or just removed, right? Like selectively chosen. His teachings, he didn't, I don't think, realize that basically he was going to be the face of the church of Christianity that was totally the antithesis of basically his teachings. So, it is interesting though. We're entering into this Aquarius age, and it's almost like 2,000 years ago, he became this prominent figure, so that at this time, when we're in the Aquarian age, when we're moving into this new time of the individual, of recognizing and understanding that everybody in their unique ways are important, like a puzzle piece to this whole picture, and that we're all connected, etc. That he was teaching, again, way advanced for his time, but so that we would be able to return to his actual teachings at this point in time in history to learn the actual ways, and not the mistruths that have been presented for so long. So, and this is also, the Aquarian age that we're stepping into. And if you listen to some of my very early episodes on the podcast, I talk about this, the Aquarian age. We're entering into a time where more people are going to ascend than ever has been possible in a very long time, but definitely ever been possible in any of our living existences in this incarnation, in our current lives. So it is a very important time to come back to this information and to rewrite this aspect of his teachings. So, then this was a quote that came from also Levi. In Egypt, it was said, this is Jesus, my human life was wholly given to bring my will into tune with the deific will. When this was done, my earth tasks all were done. You know that all my life was great drama for the sons of men. I lived to show the possibilities of men. So let's step into his teachings, because he just talks about several of them there in that quote. So what were his actual teachings? So one of his main teachings, and there's a lot actually, okay, also say there are many teachings of his, but I am going to highlight three very important ones. If we can only tune into three, let's pay attention to these ones. One is that he lived to show us that we all have the source within, that we all, and I mentioned this earlier, but that we all have these abilities, that we all are made of God, that we all have this God spark within us, and that by tapping in and tuning into that, we are very powerful beings and powerful creators. He understood the principles of the universe. He understood the law of attraction. He understood the importance, as all ascended masters do, of managing their thoughts, understanding that faux hot free floating energy that all existence and matter is created of, that we, by directing our minds and our thoughts, then direct that energy to then create what we want in our lives. And we are all able and capable of doing that, because we are all the same in the way that we are all created from the divine creator, right? So from the Nag Hammadi text, for example, Jesus says, quote, "The living God dwells in you and you dwell in him," right? And so this is very different than traditional church teachings in Catholicism or Christianity, who say that God is a separate, really, being that nobody can speak to except through a priest and, the yada, yada. No, 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 no. He is very clearly saying that the living God is in each of us, right? That God spark is in each of us. The source is within us, and that we are also of it, right? That's that unity consciousness. It's talking about unity, right? That we are all one, we are all connected. Okay. And so that was a huge, huge teachings. And he said, quote, "What I have done, all men can do, and what I am, all men shall be." Okay. What I have done, all men can do, and what I am, all men shall be. Okay. And so he again was saying, one, we can all, so this goes into the second one, right? So we all have this God potential, capacity. We all can connect to God, to our higher selves, to source through our going within, through meditating, through sitting still, through listening, right? Listening to our inner selves, our own intuition that is connected to God. And by doing that, we also can create the lives we want, and we can reach this level of ascension. Okay, that was his next teaching. By him dying and resurrecting and then returning in our spirit form, in spirit. I guess it's not really a form. That's the 3D talking, but returning in spirit essence, he was demonstrating ascension is possible. That this 3D realm of earth is not it. We don't just live and die and that's it. That we are all eternal, right? That we are, our essences, our spirits, our soul is ongoing. It is eternal. It does not die, and it can never die. And that we are all immortal in that way. So that, that's why he, again, died and then resurrected, was to show that we are made of spirit and, our soul and our essence, and that aspect of ourselves, not our physical form, but that other aspect of ourselves continues on, right? That we are all eternal beings, just like him, and in that being, just like God, right? That's all another principle of the universe. No matter is ever destroyed. You cannot, or not matter, energy cannot be destroyed. It can be transformed, it can be transmuted, but it can never be destroyed. So in that way, everything is immortal and everything is eternal. So again, very different than the traditional teachings of the time and the ones that have been perpetuated, this idea of damnation and we're going to hell and yada, yada. No, that's just incorrect. Again, our spirit and souls live on. We decide when we want to incarnate again into physical form. And yes, guess what? By the way, we also can choose to ascend and not come back into physical form. And many of us are on that path at this point in time in history. So it's pretty incredible. So that was another big important teaching. So we've got, basically that we all have God within us and that we don't need to go outside of ourselves or consult a third party to connect with, God or the divine realm, that we can just go within. And in fact, it's recommended we go within and listen. If we actually listen, hear our inner selves, hear the God spark within. Two, that we are also able to ascend, that we are not finite beings, that just, our time here on earth is not the end, that our essence continues on and always will. And then the third big teaching is about the divine feminine, and that he knew, and this was his teachings was the importance of the feminine component. And he and Mary Magdalene, were an absolute tag team. They went over, Mary Magdalene was with him and not only assisted him, but also did her own healings in her own right as a very, very powerful, also very educated woman herself. And they performed these, mass healings and all these things all over, and they did it together. And in fact, it's interesting because people were basically, because the followers of Jesus were so dedicated to him and had such trust and belief in him, even though at that time the general population still was kind of like about women, they would still follow and still accept the healings of Mary Magdalene, etc., because of their trust in Jesus. That's how much he was also in support, right, of women. Again, Mary Magdalene was his right hand woman and considered it equal. He did not think about power over in their relationship. It was an equitable relationship. It was an equitable dynamic. And he knew that he needed her in many ways in order to reach the states in these advanced states of being where he could ascend and could basically do what he did. Basically to do what he did by being crucified on the cross and then literally raising from the dead. And so much so is who was the first person that he visited when he returned in spirit form? It was Mary Magdalene, right? So that in of itself is evidence of how much respect he had for her as his, definitely, if people believe in twin flames or soulmates or what have you, I mean, certainly they were, and understood again that together, the combination of the masculine and feminine for them together. Now, it doesn't always have to be a masculine and feminine relationship. I'm not just speaking to that. I'm speaking to the two components are needed in order for any creation to occur. And I'm not saying only certain relationships or none of that. I'm just saying for them and for his situation, he needed Mary Magdalene as that component in order to do what he ultimately did. Okay. So that's very important, that other aspect. So those are the three teachings I'm highlighting today about, or that from Jesus, and what he is wanting to rectify in terms of his messaging and putting that forth. Again, that we all have this God spark within us. That's a commonality. It's a unifying factor between all of us. Two, that we are able to ascend and we have these capabilities within us. And three, that he understood and recognized the importance of the feminine aspect as complementary and necessary along with the masculine aspect. Actually, one other thing I'm just thinking of, I don't want to miss out on, is when we talk about Jesus, quote, the Christ, okay? He never claimed to be the Christ. That was done after his existence. And what Christ actually translates to is love. Okay? Love is what Christ translates to. So when these churches are saying Jesus the Christ and that's not accurate, actually. I mean, he love, and that was also part of his teaching, was all about love. And this, when I talk about unity, what unifies us, it's in our heart chakra. It's in the centerness of neutrality is within our hearts. So he wanted us to return to love, not divisiveness, not hatefulness, not spite, not all of this that was promoted by the patriarchy. He was all about love. And this just transitions us very well to how to connect with Jay, refer to him as Jay, or Jesus, how you can connect with him, and like what his energy is like. And I have found his energy to be very calm, very gentle, jovial. He's a jokester. I find him to be quite funny, although he can be very proper and serious about certain things, but he also has this lightheartedness to him. I kind of feel like he's a little bit of a hippie vibe, very non-judgmental, very benevolent, very loving, very kind, an incredible healer. Also very much connected to animals, so can help you out with that too. So that's just been my yeah, and he's with me now, and he's like, yeah, I think that's pretty on point. He's like, yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. Um, so know that anyone can connect with Jesus. You can say, hey, Jesus, hey, Jay, I'd like to connect more with you. And he certainly is happy and willing to connect with folks, especially those who are interested in this ascension journey, but just in general, he's very happy to connect with you. Again, he is an ascended master, and he would love, many ascended masters are committed to helping Earth and helping our planet ascend. And he is very much one of them, right? As I've mentioned earlier in the episode, he came down during MLK times to help move things in that direction towards equality. And so, he is committed in his spirit, soul, essence form to still help us here on the 3D and help this planet hopefully actually get up to the 5D and beyond. But he is here to help. So please do not hesitate to reach out to him. I know many of us sometimes feel like, oh, I don't want to be bothering them or what have you, but that just is not the case. The thing is when you are an ascended master, you can be multiple places at once. We are not confined by time and space when in that level of existence. So please do not hesitate to reach out to him. He would like to be helping more folks. And also would love for people to kind of pass along his more corrected messaging going forward. So in any ways you all would like to help with that. So thank you so much for listening here today, and stay tuned because, there might be more messages from Jesus that come along, or he wants me to pass along. So I will be happy to do that with him, or perhaps he'll provide some messages through me and I'll be a vessel of channeling for him. We'll see. I would love that as well. Anyways, thanks so much for being here. Check out my website, chloepedalino.com. I have a lot of offerings there, one-to-one sessions, the Cards of the Magi course, again, that incredible Magi from the East. That could also be a great gift for people, and one-on-one sessions. And I have a couple of retreats coming up, 2 in Mount Shasta. The next one, upcoming one in Mount Shasta, is May 7th through 11th. And I would love to have you join me there for some incredible experiences in the vortex and portals up on Mount Shasta, spending time in Ascended Master Forest, and so many other cool things. So I would love to have you join me there. All right, y'all. Until next time, I wish you health and wellness. Thanks so much, y'all.